Today, we are looking at a breaking, historic escalation that threatens to plunge the entire Middle East into darkness and the global economy into an unprecedented tailspin. United States President Donald Trump has issued a chilling 48-hour ultimatum to the Islamic Republic of Iran. The demand is simple and absolute: reopen the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping, or the United States military will systematically obliterate Iran's energy infrastructure. Starting with its largest power plants, the clock is ticking toward a midnight deadline, and the stakes could not be higher. Instead of backing down, Tehran has doubled down. Iran is openly defying the ultimatum, threatening to deploy a wave of drifting naval mines across the Persian Gulf to paralyze trade entirely. Furthermore, the Iranian military command has vowed that if American forces strike their power grid, Iran will respond by targeting the energy and water desalination plants of the United States, Israel, and any regional nation hosting American bases. We are no longer just witnessing a localized military exchange. This is a multi-front war with the potential to trigger the most severe global energy crisis in modern history. But how did the United States and Iran reach this catastrophic breaking point in just 3 weeks of conflict? What exactly is the strategic value of the Strait of Hormuz? And what happens to the world if both nations make good on their apocalyptic threats? Let's dive into the facts. To understand the gravity of this ultimatum, we must first look at the geographical realities of the board. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. At its narrowest point, it is just 21 miles wide, with the designated shipping lanes restricted to a mere 2 miles in either direction. In peacetime, roughly 1/5 of the world's total crude oil consumption passes through this geographic bottleneck every single day for decades. American foreign policy has treated the free flow of commerce through the Strait of Hormuz as a core national security interest. The Carter Doctrine of 1980 explicitly stated that the United States would use military force to defend its national interests. In the Persian Gulf today, a joint coalition of nations including the United Kingdom, France, Germany, South Korea, and Australia has issued a stark condemnation of Iran's de facto closure of the strait, expressing a readiness to secure safe passage. Yet, securing a waterway laced with anti-ship missiles and fast attack craft is a monumental military challenge. On February 28, the United States and Israel launched a massive, coordinated military campaign against Iran. The primary objective, according to Washington and Jerusalem, was to permanently degrade Iran's nuclear ambitions and its regional strike capabilities. But military planners have long known that Iran's ultimate defensive weapon is not just its ballistic missiles, it is geography. In direct retaliation for the ongoing bombardment, Tehran effectively choked off the Strait of Hormuz by restricting vessels from nations involved in the military campaign against them. Iran is pressing its hand directly against the jugular vein of the global economy. This tactical chokehold prompted President Trump's explosive weekend ultimatum. Taking to social media, the president declared that if the key oil passage is not fully reopened by 23:44 GMT on Monday, American forces will execute a devastating new phase of the war. They will drop the pretense of strictly targeting military sites and begin destroying the civilian energy grid. The rhetoric out of Washington suggests a belief that overwhelming force will inevitably compel Iranian capitulation. But the narrative emerging from Tehran paints a very different picture. Iran has shown no indication of bending to the American president's will. Analysts from institutions like Chatham House have noted that the Iranian government and its military command are proving highly resilient, surviving the loss of top leaders and maintaining a durable strike capacity. In response to the American threat, Iran's operational command issued a terrifying counter-ultimatum. They stated that if the United States carries out its threats against Iranian power plants, the Strait of Hormuz will be completely and indefinitely closed until the destroyed Iranian infrastructure is rebuilt, a process that could take years. More alarmingly, Iran's state media has published detailed maps designating potential retaliatory targets. These targets include Israel's two largest power plants, as well as critical energy and water desalination facilities across Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Kuwait. To back up these threats, Iran has warned it will deploy drifting mines across the Gulf. There is a dark historical precedent for this. During the brutal Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the so-called tanker war saw Iran heavily mine the Gulf waters, damaging international vessels and eventually drawing the United States Navy into direct surface combat. Today, the deployment of untethered mines would make the waterway impassable for commercial oil tankers, completely paralyzing regional trade regardless of who officially controls the strait. As with any conflict of this magnitude, There are deep, conflicting narratives driving the violence. From the perspective of the United States and its allies, Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz is an illegal act of economic terrorism that holds the entire world hostage. President Trump and his administration argue that the global community cannot allow a single nation to dictate the flow of essential commodities. From this viewpoint, the threat to destroy power plants is a necessary, albeit extreme, measure of deterrence to force a rogue state back into compliance with international maritime law. Conversely, from the Iranian perspective, the United States and Israel are the aggressors who initiated an unprovoked war. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araqi maintains that Iran is merely exercising its sovereign right to defend itself. To Tehran, it is utterly hypocritical for the United States to launch thousands of airstrikes against Iranian soil and then demand that Iran keep the waterways open to facilitate the economic prosperity of the very nations bombing them. From the Iranian point of view, if their country is to be deprived of security and electricity, the entire region will share in the darkness. But beneath the high-level military strategies and geopolitical posturing, we must focus on the profound human impact and the devastating global consequences of this war. Behind the headlines, real people are already paying the ultimate price. In Israel, the notion of absolute security has been heavily fractured. Over the weekend, Iranian missiles evaded Israel's vaunted air defense systems, striking the southern towns of Arad and Dimona. Over 100 civilians were injured, with massive craters carved into residential neighborhoods. Dimona is particularly significant because it sits just miles away from what is widely believed to be the Middle East's only atomic arsenal. While Israel maintains a policy of nuclear ambiguity, the fact that Iranian ballistic missiles are landing so close to this highly sensitive desert facility has sent shockwaves through the global intelligence community. In Iran, the human suffering is catastrophic. According to human rights organizations, the 3-week bombardment has already claimed the lives of over 3,200 people, including more than 1,400 civilians. Now, if the United States executes its threat to destroy power plants, the humanitarian crisis will multiply exponentially. Knocking out a national power grid means hospitals lose life support, water purification systems fail, and basic sanitation collapses. Then there are the massive, sprawling economic consequences that will impact every viewer watching this video. The standoff has already sent global crude oil prices soaring past $105 a barrel. The head of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, has issued a dire warning. At least 40 energy assets across the Middle East are already severely damaged. If this conflict continues and the strait remains closed, the daily loss of oil will put the world on track for a crisis worse than the combined impact of the 1970s oil shocks and the Russia-Ukraine war. Patrick Pouyanné, the head of French oil giant TotalEnergies, has openly warned that the macroeconomic outlook will deteriorate rapidly. The longer this conflict drags on, no country will be immune to the effects of this crisis. Birol stated, "We are looking at the very real possibility of hyperinflation, crippling gas prices, global supply chain collapses, and a deep, prolonged worldwide recession. Working families from London to Tokyo to Los Angeles will be forced to shoulder the crushing economic burden of a war fought thousands of miles away." This brings us to a critical, defining crossroads in modern history. The United States has drawn a definitive, destructive line in the sand, and Iran is standing firmly its ground, daring Washington to cross it. The clock on the 48-hour ultimatum is running out. This leaves us with a set of thought-provoking, urgent questions for you, our viewers. First, is President Trump's ultimatum a necessary display of strength to secure vital global trade routes? Or is it a reckless escalation that guarantees the destruction of civilian infrastructure in a wider, uncontrollable regional war? Second, if Iran follows through on its threat to mine the Gulf and target desalination plants across the Middle East, how should the international community respond to a deliberate attempt to plunge the region into an unlivable crisis? And finally, as we stare down the barrel of an unprecedented global energy shock, does this conflict prove that the world's absolute reliance on Middle Eastern oil is a fatal vulnerability that must be abandoned? We want to hear your perspective on these incredibly complex and vital issues. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's get a thoughtful, critical conversation started. If you appreciate factual, deep-dive political journalism that looks at every angle without the sensationalism, please hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you never miss an in-depth report. Until next time, stay informed, stay critical, and keep asking the hard questions. I am your host, and this is Politique News.